Thanks for tuning into another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. It has been such a long time, but we are back. Joshua Houtz, it's good to see you, my friend. It's been about a week, and we have an absolutely loaded show to get to. But before we get to all that, how was the beach?
It's a trip when you have 3 kids, so it's a lot different now the older I get, so it was still fun to get away, but I'm gonna be honest, I missed you. I missed being able to sit there and scroll the timeline and be up to date with everything it went on, so stoked to be back on this podcast, man, stoked to see your handsome face and to be able to talk about the Dolphins. How have you been, man? It's been about a week, like you said.
Sun is shining. We're getting positive Dolphins camp news every day. That's not wood, but I'm knocking my hardest, Josh, because we are just praying that no injuries come in these coming weeks. We have a preseason game on Friday. We have some joint practices Tuesday and Wednesday. So what we're doing today, Tyreek Hill got the bag. We're going to talk about that, his restructured contract, the NFL top 100 list, and then some nagging injuries the Miami Dolphins are dealing with. But Josh, I just got one beach question. Can you give me like a rank 1 to 10? How's the Houtz Sandcastle game looking right now? Give me like a scale of 1 to 10.
A 6. It's pretty poor. It's pretty bad. I mean, I was gonna say even under a 6. I mean, the kids still are learning how to do all that, and honestly, I just take my oldest down to the beach and we just run away from the waves. So we got to work on that for sure, man. We definitely got to do some work there.
No moats. There was no moat with this castle.
Unintentionally, I think every time they built something, they loved to do it close to the water. So then, the wave would come up and knock it over and they thought it was hilarious. So yeah, still working on it for sure. So 6 was definitely a little bit high, probably more like 4 maybe.
Hey man, only way to go up from there is got to keep learning, got to keep building those castles. And that's what the Dolphins have been doing, Josh. I think this is the first time in my experience as a fan of being the Miami Dolphins. I turned 30 in a week. So I don't have memories of Dan Marino. I don't have memories of Don Shula, different things like that. What we are seeing the Dolphins develop here, Josh, for the first time in my life is continuity. We had Jalen Waddle get extended through 2028. You had franchise quarterback Tua Tagovailoa also get extended through 2028. And then on Saturday, we got the news dump that the Miami Dolphins and Tyreek Hill agreed to a restructured contract. And at first, you wonder, that's great, but what does that mean? Because I think, Josh, we spent about a month talking about the idea that Tyreek Hill's contract, he was being paid as one of the highest paid wide receivers in the league, but there was a little bit of a poison pill at the end of his contract. I think it was a $55 million cap hit, give or take, something, $56 million cap hit where you could cut Tyreek Hill entering the 2026 season, save about $40 million. That was such a weird way to have the salary cap kind of laid out. So Josh, what the Dolphins did was decide, all right, we got to give Tyreek his money. We got to make sure he stays here for the long term. So before we get into the nitty gritty of these contract details, it's pretty awesome, man, to have a 1-2 punch like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, so secure and just primed to continue to be one of the better offenses in the entire NFL.
Yeah, and we got the quarterback too, right? I mean, I think I need to go away more often because I think right before I left for the beach is when the Tua Tagovailoa contract went down, and then Tyreek Hill gets his bag. So yes, it's just different times for the Miami Dolphins, and I think the way the contract was structured. If Tyreek Hill did what he went out there and did, exceeded expectations, they were eventually going to revisit this thing. So we've heard time and time again he wanted to retire with the Miami Dolphins. I don't know if once this deal runs out if he's going to retire, but he's got his money, he's happy, and it's well deserved after again those 2 seasons that he's had with the Miami Dolphins, where a lot of people said you're going down there with Tua Tagovailoa, you're quote unquote just getting the bag and you're just going to sit there and retire right off into the sunset, Mike Wallace style. He's done anything but that. He's been absolutely out of his mind. So I'm glad this thing got done. Shout out to Jeff Darlington, because I do think that we came on here one day and I think you made sure that you gave Jeff Darlington credit, and he was the one that said, he thinks this thing's going to get done. And here we are, man. Tyreek Hill locked up, Jalen Waddle locked up, Tua Tagovailoa locked up.
And just can we talk about just the growth of this franchise for just a second? Because before it was, we got Ryan Tannehill in the building. We got to get him weapons, and it's throw the bag at Mike Wallace. Trading for Tyreek Hill was such a massive risk, but the way that contract was situated, it did give you kind of like a panic button type out. Like, we got to eject. This was a complete disaster. We have Brandon Gibson answering for Tyreek Hill at the podium. What the hell is going on here? That hasn't been the case, though. So shout out to Chris Greer, shout out to Brandon Shore for giving the Dolphins an opportunity to, hey, let's bring in Tyreek Hill. Let's see if he can fit. And Josh, I I think something we should just continue to talk about till we're blue in the face is not only the fact it was successful, but did we think it'd be this successful being a top 3 offense back-to-back years? The way they're kind of positioned is to continue that trend for years to come, where when it was Mike Wallace, it was like, oh man, hopefully we'll get a couple deep balls. We got no Sean Moreno to run the football. Like, you just see an entirely different process where the entire franchise is moving in the same direction, and having those few years of testing things out, testing the waters with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Tua, it was an absolute blast and it was an absolute success, and it's great we get to see it for a few more years.
And we have to sit here and cherish it. I mean, as corny as that sounds, this does not come around that often. I mean, Tyreek Hill, as we'll talk about, is being considered one of the best receivers. He's up there as one of the better receivers of all time. Top 5, but when it's all said and done, probably. So the dude just continues to put up huge numbers, and it's nice to finally have him under contract. To finally have, like you said, this continuity and to see where it goes, because he's under till 2026, right? I think you'd written down Waddle and Tua to 2000. Through 2000, okay, awesome. But that's where the window is right now. We got 2026. We need these expectations. They're high as hell, and we just hope it all pans out. But great days to be Dolphin fans. And again, when this trade went down, we just all sat here and said, okay, how is this going to backfire in our face? Because it's the Miami Dolphins. We've seen this before, but it's been anything but like that. And like you said, I mean, Mike McDaniel's just sprinkling him with targets, and it's just a wonderful sight to see. And we're excited to see where it goes in year 3 in this offense.
Very grateful for a plan, man. More than anything else, I'm just so grateful that the Dolphins have a legitimate plan after years of throwing things against the wall. For the contract here, first reported by ESPN on Saturday, Tyreek will earn $106 million guaranteed over 4 years. And that included last year, because we got to think about the fact that no more years were added to this contract. And Josh, I'm praying to God that we're approaching the point where we kind of get numb to the idea of highest paid and highest guaranteed, not because that stuff's not important, not because we don't want to celebrate the successes of Tyreek Hill. It's just there's so many backflips going on with these contracts where I just want to know like the details here. I want to know what it actually is, instead of let's hype up an agent here and let's hype up this guy over here. So Pro Football Talk, I know everyone's not a huge fan of Mike Florio and Chris Sims, but they shared some interesting nuggets about this contract. Hill's compensation for 2026 is not guaranteed at signing. As of 2026, $11 million of the $36 million becomes fully guaranteed. That means Miami will have a little bit of time to make a decision. The deal also includes a maximum annual incentive of $500,000 for more than 50% of playing time in a playoff game and a playoff win. The deal increases his pay for the next 2 years by $11.4 million. It reduces his prior $45 million cap hit for 2026 to $36 million. Josh, I don't think anything is super surprising there. I honestly thought the Dolphins were going to have to really guarantee 2026 completely for Tyreek Hill. So is anything really stick out to you there when you think about the fact that he did kind of have that poison pill and, you see things smoothed out just a little bit?
Not really. I mean, I just wanted to say thank you, Jake, so much for having that to be able to explain it to us, because they are, every time a new contract's done, it is so difficult to fully understand how it's written. I mean, I guess the one thing that really stood out to me was those incentives for, playoff time and playoff win and things like that, because it didn't seem that long ago where Tyreek Hill was tweeting out, there was an interview where he said, you forget about 2,000 yards. That was selfish. He wants to focus on a playoff game, and then building on that. So it's funny to see that, but again, none of it really stands out. It's just, again, unprecedented. The Dolphins, gave him this guaranteed money, but not surprising, again, when this dude just breaking franchise records, when he's going out there, seeing the most targets in his career, with the Dolphins. It's just so funny how polar opposite it was to what the entire narrative was when the trade went down, how complete opposite it's been for Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill. And we just hope it continues, because we need to win that game. That we need to win a playoff game. We need to win, hopefully, a Super Bowl, because that's really all that matters, like Tyreek Hill said at this point.
First team All-Pro in each of the last 2 seasons, was the NFL receiving yards leader and the co-leader in receiving touchdowns last season. Josh, he reached 1,000 receiving yards by week 8. My fantasy football team was absolutely loving that. Week 8, this man had 1,000 receiving yards, dude. Just the utilization is so impressive, and that's where one of the things we're going to have to follow. As Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle become bigger parts of the salary cap, it's kind of weird, Josh. That's happening at the same time we're talking about we got to conserve these guys for later in the year. So what are your thoughts when you kind of, you look at 2025, you look at 2026, and you see the high portion of the salary cap that goes to Tua, Waddle, and Tyreek. But at the same time, Josh, we're in a situation where we need some other guys to step up earlier in the season so that those guys can be fresh when, you're facing the Chiefs in negative 4,000-degree weather on Hoth.
Yeah, and that's what we need to see. We need to see who's going to step up. That's what really matters at this point. Who's going to be that next guy in line? Who's going to take over when a Tyreek Hill, heaven forbid, he's banged up late in the year, and we need him to rest up for this playoff push. So that to me is going to be the most intriguing thing to see who steps up and becomes that third guy in this thing. But again, it's just nice to have this problem. The nice to have these two dynamic receivers, and I do have to be the first one to admit. I think we always talk about putting egg on our face, but there was a time a couple months ago where I think I even said, the Dolphins may have to move on from a lot of people thought the Dolphins may eventually have to move on from Tyreek Hill. And, Jalen Waddle was the future number one, and that didn't happen. So egg on my face. Glad I was wrong. Glad some other people were wrong, and glad we get to see this explosive ass offense. I mean, that's what it means to me when you see those huge numbers. Those contracts inflating. We saw how great they were last year. They cannot sputter late in the season, but we're not worried about that.
It was really an entire weekend of celebrating Tyreek Hill. He landed number one on the NFL Network's top 100 list. He was the first wide receiver to ever earn the honors. It was kind of cool. They actually had a clip from 2017 when he was a rookie, when he was saying, Tyreek Hill, the cheetah, he should be number one on the list. And he called out, I think it was Tom Brady, who was number one that year. Josh, were you following this list closely? I know we wrote up some stories on the Finsider when different guys were named. I think Tua was in the 30s, something like that. You had Raheem Mostert at 60. I think the Dolphins were second with 8 players on the list. San Francisco was number 9 on the list. But how closely were you following this, especially when it got to that top 10?
Yeah, I mean, just as much as whatever I saw on Twitter, I guess. I think in years past, I was more focused on it, sitting there, running to the computer to probably clip things, to get that out there first, but not quite that into it. But again, I was on a vacation a little bit, so it was crazy to see that 8 of the Dolphin players landed on there. And then once it did get down to that top 10, then it was, starting to get intriguing to see where Tyreek Hill landed, because we knew he was one of the better players in football, but it was interesting to see, what his peers thought of him.
My mind really started racing when Mahomes went fourth. Then, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, and Lamar Jackson were still there. Josh, do we need to have a 20-minute debate that Patrick Mahomes is the best player in the NFL?
No, not at all. And I think people should be mad at me. I've said time and time again that I think he's probably the best quarterback I ever laid eyes on, and that includes Marino. So I'm going to stick with that. But I don't understand people being upset about it. It seems like this is what the peers thought. So we don't need it, Jake. And even though I just went, 30 seconds? Way
that was
longer
the
than I need
Spartans
to.
version. That's totally fine. I went full Pepe Silvia when I saw Mahomes at fourth. First, I was like, oh, they're going to make Lamar number one to kind of speak to their MVP voting to make sure they back up that. And I'm like, sure, whatever. I buy it. I mean, if you want to do that, go ahead. Mahomes is still my go. And then I got to thinking, are they going to do McCaffrey and then back up Madden and kind of give you that aspect of it, just that all-around player? I think McCaffrey, he tied Raheem Mostert in total touchdowns. I think McCaffrey had 14 rushing touchdowns, 7 receiving touchdowns. Just every year, he's a complete stud too. But man, was it sweet getting an entire weekend just to flat out celebrate Tyreek Hill. Just seeing what he's done for the Dolphins and all the clips we get of people just sitting on the sideline saying, man, there goes Tyreek Hill again. I think this was such a fun exercise, not because you can argue that these guys belong on the top, but just to celebrate the successes of all these different players, to celebrate the successes of Tyreek Hill, who's gradually worked his way up on the list, to have the number one player, Josh, in the entire NFL on the Miami Dolphins. That's a treat, man. That was an absolute treat to read through the weekend. You got all the analysts poo-pooing it should have been Mahomes. It should have been Mahomes. No, duh, it should have been Mahomes. But I'm going to mute all that crap. And instead, I'm going to take this time to look at it started at the Chargers game. It was so great seeing pouty Austin Eckler on the sidelines Tyreek Hill did it to us again. That stuff is what dreams are made of. Let me drink all your tears, Charger fans.
Yeah, what's crazy is, we still sit here and can look back at some of the games where he had drops in the end zone, and there's so much, meat left on the bone where, he probably would have had that 2,000 yards. He probably would have exceeded the touchdowns or whatever. So it's just great to be in this situation, to have a player of his stature. And again, to have him come to Miami where instead of, not being the same player, he exceeded expectations. We're sitting here talking about celebrating him. We have to throw out there his Madden rating as well. 99 overall, first Dolphin ever to get into that club. And so it's been a hell of a week for Tyreek Hill. And again, I'm intrigued to see where he goes from here because every year you sit there and say, okay, he can't put up the same amount of receptions, he can't put up the same amount of yards or touchdowns, and we see him just become even more explosive. I think there was one of the shows earlier this morning that asked, is he the best player in football that wasn't a quarterback? And it's hard to say that there's anybody else more explosive or dynamic than Tyreek Hill.
So players voted on this throughout. I think it was they had October through December. I think it was NFL Network's Peter Schrager who was talking about that. And this was what the top 10 settled on. Max Crosby at 10, Travis Kelce 9, TJ Watt 8, Trent Williams 7, Chris Jones 6, Myles Garrett 5, Mahomes, McCaffrey, Jackson, and Tyreek Hill. Josh, something I mentioned a few minutes ago was the fact that the San Francisco 49ers had the most of any team in the top 100. They had 9 players. However, I'm reading this list here, and the Kansas City Chiefs had 3 players in the top 10 after winning back-to-back Super Bowls. They had Travis Kelce at 9, Chris Jones at 6, and then obviously Patrick Mahomes at 4. The Dolphins had Tyreek Hill listed number 1. Let's get into our little fantasy world, Josh. Dolphins win the Super Bowl this year. Who are the 3 players that would need to be in the NFL top 100 lists for that to become a reality?
Tyreek Hill, Tua, and Waddle seems like a cop out. I'm gonna say I'll go Waddle. I guess Waddle. At top 10, I'm trying to think of how far they can show. I was gonna say Achane. I was gonna say Devon Achane as that third guy, but I pushed that. I'm gonna go Achane. So I'll change that. So Tua, Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane. I can't believe I could see him shooting up that high, but hell with it.
I was gonna say, man. Your brain kind of goes right to like it's just gonna be like an offense explosion type of thing.
Yeah, I should have said Jalen Ramsey. Is that the right answer?
It is.
I'm sitting here yeah, okay. You got it out of me. My brain's just sitting there thinking offense. Yeah, Jalen Ramsey's going to be that. He would probably be that other player, the star position, how excited everybody is to see him in Anthony Weaver's defense, not being bitter like he was last year with Vic Fangio. So, yeah, that's probably the right answer, but I'll go back to Devon Achane. Is that what you were going to say, Jalen Ramsey? Were you thinking with a clear vision there?
So I kind of look at like someone like Chris Jones, Myles Garrett. Obviously, those guys play in the trenches, Max Crosby. But I kind of see Jalen Ramsey as having like that same game-breaking potential, just his versatility, ability to line up all over the field. And Josh, just for like my left field crazy wild take. So the Dolphins had 8 players on the list. Teron Armstead at 67. Jordan Poyer came in at 65. I thought that was pretty cool to see. Jalen Waddle 63. Bradley Chubb 62, Raheem Mostert 60, Tua 36, Ramsey 25, Tyreek Hill number 1. How much of a homer am I if to see someone who is not even on this list? Is there any way somebody that's not even on this list could pop up to the top 10?
I mean, that's what I was trying to think. I don't know. I mean, what would he have to do? 2,000 all-purpose yards and like 20 touchdowns? I mean,
brother, I'm talking Javon Holland. I could see Javon Holland going from a 0 to an absolute hero on this list. Javon Holland's the biggest snub, and like I don't want to be too much of a poo-poo in this list because the Dolphins had 8 players, and it's been awesome to kind of see that when you think about the league, every team's going to have about 3, and the Dolphins have more than double that. So I'm not going to poo-poo it at all, but Javon Holland, when you consider the voting happened October through December, that's when he was dealing with his injuries. I think he was having the best year of his career in Vic Fangio's system last year. So that's someone, man, I don't know if that's too crazy of a take to say someone can jump that high, but considering Holland in that contract year, another one of those players who I think he was, an absolute monster when it came to forced fumbles last year. If he could really start to develop those turnovers, I mean, I could see him slingshotting. I mean, top 10 might sound a little crazy the more we talk about this, but I mean, to see him like jump up to the top 35 in a contract year, and then maybe he gets that big contract 4 weeks into the season to kind of help build that stock. That's one player I thought could maybe throw a huge wrench into everything.
Yeah, and I love that. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about Javon Holland because he was that guy that was on pace to have, career year. And another player that, probably would be on this list if he wasn't banged up again, Jalen Phillips. I mean, Bradley Chubb too, right? I mean, there's so many. Bradley Chubb was on this list, forgive me. But Jalen Phillips, I mean, that's another guy that could be on there. Another player I was just going to throw out there, and I know we're moving on to Javon Holland, but what about Chop Robinson? We keep hearing about how explosive he's been. Could he be that guy that playmaker, that different? shooting up the top 10 as a rookie. That's just wild. So you did mention Javon Holland today. I think Mike McDaniel said that Chris Greer had a new deal on his platter or something, working on it behind the scenes. I see how some people say that, could this be another Christian Wilkins situation? And we have to throw out that is officially represented by Athletes First. So would love to see Javon Holland exceed expectations, and would more importantly love to see the Dolphins lock him up, because we sit here and talk about that safety depth. We're talking about Jordan Poyer being out, having an unhappy Javon Holland after this year, even having him hit in the market. Gosh, what would that do to this defense?
So we were doing podcasts, and there have been so many things that happened this offseason. We were doing podcasts when I'd look at Over the Cap, I'd look at Spotrac, and the Dolphins were $50 million in the red for the 2024 season. $50 million in the red. Now, there was a new media deal that went through that had a big boost. It gave the Dolphins close to $30 million in cap space, but Miami was still able to extend Tua, extend Jalen Waddle, extend Tyreek Hill. And suddenly, Josh, the Dolphins are sitting there with a 90-man roster. They have $35 million in cap space. That's fifth most in the NFL. Now, I've seen some people, why didn't we resign Robert Hunt? Why didn't we sign Christian Wilkins? But before we get into that, you see $35 million, Josh. What should the Dolphins do?
Resign their own, right? I'm sitting here and I'm putting down a sad face, because I'm pretty sure, like, back with the whole Brian Flores thing, GM Houtz or owner Houtz would have fired Chris Greer. I'm just sitting here with egg on my face, like, this dude is literally Houdini. He turned this thing into, you said we were in the red and 50 million, now we're at 36 million. Chris Greer deserves, he deserves to wear that cap as much as he wants. For me, I think I'd extend Javon Holland. I'd maybe try to lock up Jalen Phillips, but I think they might be a little bit early for that one. And maybe go out there and get a guard. Maybe, I don't know, man. There's a lot of different things they should do, but they did just sign a guard, actually. So I take that back, right? Didn't they bring in a center guard?
They brought in a center guard who has actually been helping them really clean up some of the snapping issues we've had early. I got his name right here. Sorry, 1 second. Sean Harlow, former Atlanta Falcons 4th-round draft pick, recently with the Arizona Cardinals. He's been really helping them clean up the snap issues we've seen from the second and third string. So it's kind of interesting to see, someone come off the streets and instantly come in and calm people down a little bit, because I know the snapping issue was kind of one of the big things for the Dolphins. But Josh, just to kind of pull back to the salary cap real quick, when you consider $35 million, what people aren't considering is when you kind of just click the page over, and it's important to remember the Dolphins just kind of had an $80 million cap jump just from the start to the end of the training or off season. And there is a lot of ways to manipulate the cap. But this is a team, Josh, going to next year has negative $64 million in salary cap space as of right now. That ranks 30. Only the Browns and Saints have less, 84 million negative for the Browns, and then $100 million for the Saints. So I do kind of like the idea if, like, maybe a guard gets cut, the Dolphins have more than enough salary cap space to bring them in. I'd love the idea of re-signing Javon Holland, but I am begging people not to get too caught up in that $35 million number, because they need to push that to next year. They really need to start pushing some of that salary cap, because that number sounds nice, but man, this is a scenario where you don't create money without losing it down the road. And of course, I know you can pull some levers, signing bonuses, yada, yada, yada. But man, they're good for now. And it's so important to have flexibility where if someone becomes available, and you can worry about it down the road. But I'm just saying that maybe you should have it, pocketed back in the back of your mind somewhere, maybe with, I don't know what else, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Oh, it's absolutely something to keep in mind, and something that my brain, still being on vacation, didn't even think about. So I think you kind of set me up there, right? I mean, I got egg on my face right now for, saying I had egg on my face for tipping my hat to Chris Greer. So hopefully they find a way to get out of it. But let's keep that $35 million outside of re-signing Javon Holland.
I'm really in for re-signing Jalen Phillips too. It's just that those contract negotiations must be so hard right now. We'll save that for another day. But we do have a couple injuries here to talk about, Joshua Houtz. Jordan Brooks, Jordan Poyer, and Anthony Walker are all banged up, according to Mike McDaniel. Sooner than later for Brooks and Walker, according to McDaniel. Shout out Josh for putting those notes down for me. I wouldn't necessarily see any of these as a huge concern. And the fact they're just kind of saying, sidelined with injuries, banged up, I'm not overly concerned now that the pads are coming on. They're getting a little physical. They're going to be overly cautious as they had over the last few years with these guys.
Yeah, I'm gonna try not to be as negative as I've been in the past. So, him saying Poyer, we will see again. I think before this preseason, I'm gonna pretend that we didn't, hear stuff about Byron Jones, Will Fuller, things like that, and he's gonna be back, and our safety position is gonna be just fine. Okay, so nothing to worry about at all. But those guys, those are veteran leaders that the Dolphins are gonna rely on this year. That those guys they brought in this offseason. So hopefully it is just a little bit banged up, but something to keep an eye on for sure.
Some players, though, I am a little concerned about, not necessarily because of the injuries, just because there's so many limited preseason snaps, training camp snaps, and you want to see him on the field. Cam Smith, he actually returned to practice on Monday, but I believe when the team got into 11-11 drills, he went inside, I believe. So that is one player to keep in mind. Cam Smith, I think it was last weekend, he left and he hasn't really been practicing. Anthony Weaver had a lot of really good things to say about how he came back feeling more confident than last year, despite having some scars from the Vic Fangio experience. And I mean, Josh, let's be honest. We all have scars from the Vic Fangio experience.
Yeah, I don't think those scars are ever going to go away, but it's nice to hear that Cam Smith was at least, suited up. Hopefully he's back out there because we need to see him out there getting those reps. Another player that he had written down here, Eric Ezukama, he got banged up, and I don't know what his fate is here with the Miami Dolphins. I can let you read down the Mike McDaniel quote, but he's a player that, we joke, Debo, every highlight that we picture in our head, at least I originally thought was from regular season, all preseason. So, with such good a loaded receiving core, it's hard to see how Eric Ezekama can stick. But that's just me getting super negative.
It's so hard, Josh, because doing this podcast, there's a lot to be hyped about. Ethan Bonner's having a fantastic camp. Quentin Bell's having a fantastic camp. River Craycraft is having a fantastic camp. So we got to be a little concerned, like, oh man, if you're not getting any good press, no press is bad press. Any press is good press in this scenario, I'm going to say, for the Dolphins. And McDaniel came out and said it's not related to the neck injury from last year, which was a sigh of relief. And he went on to say he can't say that he's expecting to see him soon or he's expecting not to see him soon. I'm just expecting him. We'll see, that type of thing. So McDaniel never really wanted to kind of provide a timeline. But Josh, I mean, when you think about the numbers game, let's go back to 2023, the Dolphins had both Eric Ezukama and River Craycraft on the 53-man roster. Start cutting away some guys. Odell Beckham Jr., he gets a spot behind Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. That's 3 receivers. Braxton Berrios, he's going to be back. He's their punt returner. That brings you to 4 wide receivers. River Craycraft has been an absolute stud in camp as a blocker, as a receiver, just somebody who knows this, system inside and out. That's your 5th receiver. And based on the history of the Mike McDaniel era in Miami, God, it sounds like Malik Washington and Eric Ezukama are competing for that final spot.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of us have high hopes for Malik Washington, and I can't remember who said it. Was it somebody said it at one point? Best ability is the availability, and that's all I keep continuing to think about. So, again, you'd love to see Eric Ezekama somehow rally back and get out there and show some of those signs, those glimpses, that preseason God that we had. But we're all pretty hyped up for what Malik Washington can bring, and it seems like he could be that perfect long-term answer in that slot. Maybe where Odell Beckham, we're intrigued to see where he goes. And then River Craycraft, I think ever since we even mentioned him potentially sticking, he's been absolutely going ballistic. So, of course, it looks like Eric Ezekama could be that guy out, but we'll see. Stranger things have happened, right?
Yeah, it's a great time of year when we hear like the undrafted rookies stepping up, the second-year players stepping up, and this is where you're going to get their first action. You're really looking for those acorns that are really, really planting their roots and turning into that tree, that foundational piece on the roster. So this week with the Atlanta Falcons, the joint practices on Tuesday and Wednesday, along with the preseason game, there'll be a great opportunity to see if this is just training camp hype or if they can kind of live up to those words against another opponent, which, man, I'm excited for these joint practices. Moving on, however, Joshua, I want you to talk to me a little bit. I'm going to sit here for story time. And can you tell me a little bit about Tim Bowens, who is becoming the 28th member of the Miami Dolphins Ring of Honor?
Yeah, Papa Beaver's story time. You're probably too young to even know what that is. So I'm trying. So yeah, so this is a guy. He's a guy that is so underrated throughout his career. He was drafted 20th overall. He will be inducted as the 28th member of the Dolphins Ring of Honor at halftime of Miami's Week 7 matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. He started 155 out of 157 games for the Dolphins.
Oh,
That was
that
the sixth most
availability.
on that was the sixth most on the team and the most on the team from a defensive lineman. In total, 407 tackles, 22 sacks, 9 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries, and he played all 11 seasons with the Miami Dolphins. I have a quote from Tom Garfinkel here. Tim Bowens was the epitome of a team player who performed at an elite level for a long period of time, allowing both his teammates and the Miami Dolphins to be successful. From the day he was drafted until the day he retired, Tim was a warrior in the trenches. His selfless, dependable, and physical style of play is a big reason why his teammates also found success, most notably Jason Taylor and Zach Thomas. So, again, it's nice to hear that he's getting his flowers, and I just continue to think about some of the players that we were hyped up over those mediocre years, so to speak, the 7-9 seasons, the 8-8, the Cameron Wakes, the Ricky Williams, some of those other players that I think at some point do deserve their flowers. But for now, Tim Bowens is getting his day in the sun, and pretty stoked for us fans who remember the long days ago of 1994. Jake,
Year I was born. Josh, you missed the most important part. There was a Bowens Island. He had an interception.
Yeah, I guess I did miss that part. I'm sorry. That's what yeah. So he had an interception as well. So you could picture what the most recent memory of a defensive end was Philip Merlin getting like a defense tackle getting an interception for a touchdown against the Jets. So yeah, let's just picture that as being Tim Bowens. I do not remember the interception. That's my bad.
Nah, I'm just giving you a hard time, man. Could you, if you had to compare him to one player in the last 10 years on the Dolphins, who would you kind of?
Yeah, I wish. See, this is where being a Dolphins fan in central Pennsylvania really sucks because all you really watched was those primetime games. I was going to say, a dominant force in the middle. That was that big guy in the middle, right? That could, take on blocks, could be a factor in the backfield, and just that do the grunt work that opened things up for a Jason Taylor on the outside, occupied those double teams. So, Ndamukong Suh's kind of that king at that in the middle that I can first comes to mind. So we'll go with that. But let's be honest, he's probably nothing like Ndamukong Suh. Someone's gonna be like, "You're wrong, Houtz. He's not Ndamukong Suh."
I mean, you mentioned the idea.
It was Albert Hainsworth.
The way you mentioned, he kind of has that lunch pail feel, maybe Zach Sealer-ish, where he gets the credit. Well, he maybe at one point in time missed out on a little credit when Jason Taylor gets a sack or Zach Thomas gets an interception. Maybe that was Sealer with that lunch pail. Josh, Ring of Honor, other players who may belong in it. I want to throw Cameron Wake out there. The fact this team hasn't celebrated Cameron Wake every chance they get has been a little disappointing. And Rashad Jones is another one. As somebody who grew up in that phase of Miami Dolphins lore and history, give me a Rashad Jones day. Put him in the Ring of Honor because that would get everybody fired up. He was the OG dog for my Miami Dolphins fandom.
Yeah, I honestly started to write that. Then I realized that I think some of the other names that people mentioned were like Patrick Surtain and Sam Madison. So, dude, I would love to see Rashad Jones in there. Hell, give it to Chad Pennington. That was the last time the Dolphins won a division. Give it to him for what we did with the Wildcat. I did look it up just because of my Ndamukong Suh comparison. Suh was 6'4", 313 pounds. Tim Bowens was 6'4", 325 pounds. So, I mean, from a physical perspective, not too far off. And again, it's just nice that they're bringing this back because it seemed like for so long fans would be like, why isn't Cam Wake in the Ring of Honor? Why isn't a Ricky Williams who, maybe he won't get in based on, what he but there's a lot of players that are well deserving, and Tim Bowens at the top of that list. So shout out to him. I think he said he credited his long play to drinking lots of beer.
I sent you a message earlier today, Josh, and it basically was, why am I reading every Vic Fangio quote like I'm an ex-girlfriend searching for subtweets? So Vic Fangio, he became the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. And the one thing I loved about Vic in Miami is he was brutally honest, man. Like there was no BS. We mentioned like we can't tell what McDaniel means when he's talking about injuries or anything. Vic Fangio would tell you, yeah, dude, he's got a broken leg. Like he just, get anything out of you. So I think some Vic Fangio quotes came up on my timeline today, so I thought we'd spend the remainder of the show going through some of these, like a jealous ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend, just kind of seeing, Vic, are you talking about the Dolphins? You keep the Dolphins out of your mouth. So, just to kind of start here, we mentioned earlier how Anthony Weaver is trying to build up the confidence of Cam Smith. Yeah, he's got some scars from last year, but he's a really talented player. We need him to rely on his instincts, his confidence, because that's how he's going to be a great boundary receiver or cornerback in the NFL. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing here. Vic Fangio says Nakobe Dean took a step back at the stadium practice after a couple good days earlier in camp. Josh, how much do you miss Vic Fangio just kind of shitting on his own team?
I don't know. I have a bittersweet thoughts on Vic Fangio, but reading that's just like what a dick. Like, come on, man. Like, boost him up, give him some confidence. You know, he had some great practices, but then he played like dog shit in the stadium practice. I mean, that's basically what he said here. So, Vic's gonna Vic, right? Vic's gonna Vic.
Vic Fangio said he tried to get the Dolphins to trade for Milton Williams last year, but Howie Roseman wouldn't do it. Josh, Vic Fangio was campaigning for the Dolphins to add defensive linemen. If that sentence right there doesn't tell you how off base Vic Fangio and the vision of the Miami Dolphins were, that should tell you it all. Because, oh my God, Josh, at any point in the time last season, outside of when Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips got hurt, did it seem like Miami's front four was any type of weakness when they were top 5 in sacks and pressures and all that other fun stuff?
Yeah, and I mean this guy. I mean, he wanted to pick his own groceries, right? And they're like, "Nah, man, you don't need this defense tackle. Work with what you have." And I just wonder how long has Vic Fangio had his eyes on the Philadelphia Eagles, right? I mean, it seems like he just loved everything about him. He wanted to make this trade. How different would that defense have been with him in the middle? I mean, that's the real question, right? If that trade would have went down, how much different would have it changed things? But yeah, Vic Fangio just seemed like he was bitter the entire time he was here, and was never going to get his own way, right?
Milton Williams, 4 years of experience, 6'3", 290-pound defensive tackle at a Louisiana Tech. You have Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer getting double-digit sacks. What are you blaming the failures of the Dolphins on Raekwon Davis? What is going on here? What is he thinking?
Raekwon Davis got paid pretty nicely too, didn't he? Like, didn't he get a solid contract? Yeah.
The Dolphins are getting a compensatory pick.
Vic just likes to throw the dudes under the bus. That has to be what it is.
Vic Fangio said he thinks high-level play from inside linebackers is important for successful defenses in today's NFL. He added, with the way the game has evolved, it can't just be try-hard players who rely on toughness. They need to be able to play in space and cover in addition to stuffing the run. 1, shout out Zach Berman, Eagles beat writer, for sharing all this. 2, Josh, is that a subtweet at David Long Jr.?
It might have been. I won't put anything past him. It almost sounded like it, right? I mean, we like what David Long Jr. can do. We like the addition of Jordan Brooks, but that sounds like a little bit of he's still wondering. Yeah, that sounded like a little bit of a shot. Is that what you thought? And it's just same old Vic, man. I felt like this was a guy I really wanted in Miami for so long, and now he's here and just broke my heart, ran off, and now he's just talking crap about our favorite players.
High-level play from inside linebackers is important for successful defenses. You can't just be try-hard players and rely on toughness. That is such a clear message that Vic Fangio is saying. And you know, we might have to turn this into a segment. Is Vic Fangio talking about the Dolphins? Because this is just one of those scenarios where the Dolphins defense last year had so much damn talent where the stars are, I won't say never, but the stars aren't going to align like that again, where you had so much talent on one roster. And it kills me inside that it was wasted with someone like Vic Fangio, who instead of saying, wow, we have this depth at cornerback, let's get our rookie, cornerback Cam Smith involved. We have all these edge rushers. Andrew Van Ginkel's an absolute stud. Let's figure out a way to get all these guys on the field. He spent this time saying, well, I want my guys. I want different guys that can fit my scheme. And I think that should just make you feel better about the Dolphins going into this year when you have a defensive coordinator that's like, all right, we got Jordan Poyer and we got Javon Holland. That's a 1-2 punch that I can really get behind. We could bring in Marcus May late in the offseason as like my third safety that we can get into the mix. But it's not like he's completely rebuilding the entire ingredient list here for the defense.
I just want to say I love your voice and how far you've come with that. That was a perfect nasally voice, and you nailed it. I mean, I'm intrigued to see how far we've come because it just feels like this defense could take it to the next level, like you said, and we wasted it with Vic Fangio, which I feel like this entire podcast I've just been throwing egg at myself. And that was a guy that I wanted, banged the table for. I think previously as a head coach, really wanted as a defense coordinator, and it did not work out. And now, like you said, the perfect comparison is just an ex-girlfriend. You're bitter, and you just keep seeing the same shit about them on your timeline. I read that he was like he was calling the game up in the box in the preseason game, and that's just the way he calls the game. And I was just that made me angry. Like I was upset and like ready to punch my kid's Michelangelo punching bag. I got a little upset.
And this is kind of, in a weird way, Josh, we can kind of point to continuity here where it's like, hey, Vic, why'd you have to come in and do things your way? Like the Dolphins were clearly walking in a specific direction. The Dolphins signed David Long Jr. after Vic Fangio became defensive coordinator. They drafted Cam Smith after Vic Fangio became defensive coordinator. It's just very, very weird to try to put that blame elsewhere. God, man, that even has me thinking, like, what was that locker room like at the end of the year where, Kader Kohu struggles in a game, where you have someone like, what was Jalen Ramsey doing in that locker room when you have Stephon Diggs going off, when you have the Dolphins losing these, blowout games late in the season, where it's Vic Fangio saying, well, we got to blame one player instead of just, the entire defense pulling all the weight.
Yeah, to be a fly in that wall. And then, I mean, it was enough to make Javon Holland kick rocks at the end of the year. I forget where the report came from, but someone said that they kind of went rogue in a game, and the defense, I think it was maybe the Jets game where they shut the Jets out. But yeah, you just wonder how toxic that locker room was and when's it going to go away, right? It seems like whether it was the Brian Flores era, then we brought Vic Fangio in, I guess a similar mold of coach. Maybe we just need to stay away from those guys, right? Kind of similar, dickish, kind of grumpy, set in their ways. I mean, that's an outsider's perspective. I love Brian Flores. I'll be the first one to admit it, but don't like him anymore. Same with Vic Fangio. Love Vic Fangio. Love the idea of him. Do not like him anymore. Just stay up in that booth. Stay far away from the Dolphins, Vic.
And that's why I'm very excited to see what this Anthony Weaver defense looks like. It's great to see everyone, it's all great when nobody's winning, losing games and everybody's a winner, but it'll be interesting to see how Anthony Weaver kind of, navigates these trenches with the idea of a new defense, a new roster, different things like that, a second-time defensive coordinator. Josh, I got to be honest with you, brother. It was great to be back podcasting with you again. Just to wrap up here, who are some players you're hoping to kind of keep making noise during these joint practices with the Falcons and even the preseason game? Because it's great to hear guys like Quentin Bell, Ethan Bonner, the undrafted guys stepping up, but it's going to be different when you see them competing against a different team.
Yeah, I mean, those were the first guys that stuck out because, are they flashes in the pan? Another guy that, continue to hear about, Tanner Connor. Is he going to go out there and you're going to hear his name, over a Jonnu Smith, who we're going to joke that this is his revenge week. The one name that really stood out, or I guess I continue to hear, is Chop Robinson, his first step and things like that. How is he when he goes against a offense that, is made up of a different team, different breed and things like that. So a lot of players I'm intrigued to see they can take the next step. I even wrote down Liam Eichenberg because I'm intrigued to see the way that offensive line works. So Jake, anybody that really stands out to you that you maybe want to see take that next step this week and continue to hear his name in lights, or in tweets, I should say, because we don't get to see any of this stuff.
I instantly, man, my eyes sprint to that tight end depth chart because you have Jonnu Smith as the starter. You have Durham Smythe, who I think is just such an ideal jack of all trades, master of none. And I mean that with no disrespect, just that guy who can kind of step in and do everything. But then what the Dolphins have beneath them on the depth chart is a grab bag of a bunch of tight ends who can do a lot of different things. Julian Hill, the way they're trying to develop him is maybe to be like a souped up version of Durham Smythe's, primarily a blocker, but somebody who can maybe thrive over the middle, just be that guy to help move the chains, kind of like that Anthony Fasano. Then you have Jody Fortson. Are the Dolphins going to be able to do enough where this can be your, mismatch in the red zone, that jump ball target that, he could find a role in the red zone? Is that going to be enough to keep him on the roster for 17 weeks? I'm not entirely sure. And then you got, you mentioned Tanner Connor, who is just flatly a speedster, who Jonnu Smith can block, but he really makes his money from being one of the faster tight ends in the league, is one of those yak guys who I think is going to be a monster between the 20s for the Miami Dolphins. So I instantly go to that tight end depth chart and ask myself, what are the Dolphins looking for when you have three tight ends who play so differently and they're all competing for one? If you want to try to backflip and twist into two roster spots, you can do that. And then the other one I really like is the cornerback position. I'm still hoping that Cam Smith is out there this week. like we mentioned earlier, he's out there on the field, but maybe they'll keep holding him back. But just looking at that depth chart, who's going to be the guys behind Jalen Ramsey, behind Kendall Fuller? Storm Duck, he's getting some action. Is Ethan Bonner going to maintain his momentum as an absolute stud on the outside? So we are just going to have to wait and see on that one. But man, I'm excited. I'm excited to keep refreshing the timeline. We're getting some absolutely awesome videos of some bombs from Tua to Tyreek, and vibes are high. Vibes are really high right now.
Vibes are super high, and it'd be bad for us not to talk about the rookies, right? Malik Washington, Patrick Paul, see what they can do, and a name I'm just gonna keep doubling down on, tripling down on. Channing Tindall. You mentioned Anthony Weaver being out. You mentioned Jordan Brooks being banged up. Let's see what Channing Tindall can do. Finally, he needs to step up and prove that he can belongs on this roster.
Anthony Walker is out. Anthony Weaver is still on the sideline.
Yeah, I get him, and Aaron Brewer's another one. I get Aaron Brewer. I call him Anthony Brewer sometimes.
Brewer, yep.
I call him Anthony Walker. Is that? I'm not gonna say it. Wasn't there? R.I.P. Was there a guy in Fast and Furious? That was Paul Walker.
That was Paul Walker.
I'm cutting this all out.
Well, I instantly go to for some reason Aaron Brewer, who I think was a basketball player. I don't know why my brain does this.
Well, isn't that our center? Isn't Aaron Brewer our center?
Oh, I'm thinking Corey Brewer. See, Josh, this is why I'm glad we did this at the 44-minute mark. This is where we show our true colors.
We're back, baby. We're back.
Dudes can sit around just naming players and have the time of their life. I don't know if you do that. But that is it. That is all the time we have on Another Dolphins podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. We will be back after the joint practices to kind of dig through some of our notes, who kind of stuck out. But until then, I hope everybody goes out, has a wonderful week. We will talk to you soon. But until then, fins up.
Fins up.